quick reminder, please have a look at the chat, fill out the Google form, and submit it so you can be marked as present. And without further ado, I'm going to jump into introducing our next speaker, a good friend of mine and a great botanist and biologist, Gary Kaufman. Gary is, he's been the botanist and ecologist for the National Forest of North Carolina since 2007. And he has been doing wonderful things out there, everything from, forest management planning, and surveying rare plants. And he has done a lot of work with invasive plants in recent years. And he is here today to talk to us about his experiences with treating Japanese knotweed. So without further ado, Gary, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Owen. I appreciate the introduction. I'm going to share my screen and see, let's see. Can everybody see my screen and the presentation?
Good to go.
Okay, yep. Thank you. So what I am going to talk about today is using Imazamox to control Japanese knotweed, a species we respect and hate. As we were talking about just before this presentation, as Owen said, I'm Gary Kaufman. I'm working with the National Forest in North Carolina for more than 20 years. And Sue Ferrucci has also helped with this. She is the Pisgah National Forest botanist. So Japanese knotweed is one species probably that I've had the most trouble with trying to years. But with this presentation, what I'm going to talk about is our study area and why we selected that watershed, the work with partners, an inventory, how Japanese knotweed became the problem species, the history of the infestation, control and monitoring, and what we found, what we think is the most effective strategy, although there's always new things to be found. So the Southern Appalachian Cooperative Weed Management Partnership started back in the mid-2000s. It was really started with Equinox Environmental, Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and Mountain True, with and adding various state and federal agencies and some other entities, where it was trying to work together for control of invasives and for prevention, detection, control, cooperate, and really to educate and outreach as well as restoration. It's pretty quiet right now, but we were active at one time, and we always tried to prioritize what we were going to do for that individual year. And back in the early 2010, 2011, we looked at Wilson Creek, where the Nature Conservancy was wanting some work done there, where Wilson Creek watershed, looking at that because it is a wild and scenic river corridor, both wild and recreational uses, and it is dominated by the U.S. Forest Service, the Grandfather Ranger District. It has, in a portion of it on the Grandfather Ranger District, actually a wilderness study area. The Blue Ridge Parkway is in very uppermost elevational portions of that. There is state ownership of DNR ownership in the very bottom reaches of it. The Wildlife Resources Commission has ownership to its portion. And then there's the Grandfather Mountain State Park on the upper reaches. And as I said, TNC has a conservation easement, as does the Foothills Conservancy. And they're scattered private entities. And the actual ingress and egress is limited. So a perfect place to do some. And as you can see here, I can show you where the study area is. It's just on the edge of the mountain physiographic region, with the lower portion in Caldwell County, the uppermost portion in Avery County. whenever you do control work, it's always good to do a good plant inventory. So we did a non-native invasive plant inventory um, scattered across the U.S. Forest Service, and amazingly, we found some invasive species. There were lots. We characterized the 15 worst species, which are highlighted in the map on the right of this screen. And we did initial control work along the roads and the main stem of Wilson Creek. The 2 years of control work was fairly effective for along the roads and some of the trails, but we found that Japanese knotweed was the most pervasive along the main stem of Wilson Creek. And what we really found is, and you can see here, someone trying to hide in the Japanese knotweed, but we found the densest infestation in the upper headwaters, where it's in highlighted in red above the state portion, and then scattered infestations downstream of that, and one on a road. Now, these are only the infestations on the U.S. Forest Service portion. There's lots of infestations on private property downstream, as well as on the state property. I just do not have that inventory, whereas it was not done as extensively. So it's good to do a little bit of history as to why this occurred. And as you see where the infestation, the densest infestation, you'll see highlighted in red is a private piece of property. This was actually owned by Bill Crump. He had a water wheel on the stream there, and there was a intensive flood event, and it washed out his water wheel. So he wanted to retain the stream banks. So he bought some seed from Sears Roebuck, and indeed, Japanese knotweed was very, very successful. So it started from there, from the Bill Crump property, all the way down through the watershed. And the species is actually known there locally as crumpweed. So let's look at the history of Japanese knotweed. This range is Asian, Japan, China, and Korea. It was introduced into the England in 1825 as an ornamental plant, and then moved to the North America in the late 1800s. In fact, I have found a nursery catalog from the Biltmore Nursery in 1912, where 100 plants, you could buy 100 plants for $10. They were listed as very hardy and desirable. Indeed, that's what started the species moving around here in Western North Carolina and other places. But even though it has spread, it also has uses besides landscape. It's used as a medicinal species, and some medicinal companies actually create extracts both from the roots and the stems as an antioxidant, for healthy heart, resveratrol. It's actually a good laxative, Emotin. I probably, because of the problems I've had with this, I probably should be taking it more so I can really purge every time I can. Because now it is spread throughout Western North Carolina, in every county from the lowest elevation, and I've seen it above 5,000 feet. It's particularly aggressive from old home sites, roadsides, and but it seems to be worse along streams and rivers, where if you look at species, it looks bamboo-like. Here are the leaves and the flowers, but distinguishing characteristics are it's a large size herb. Sometimes people call it a actual shrub because it gets 10 feet tall. It has hollow stems, bamboo-like stems, and it has alternate large dark green truncate leaves, and the ochrea at the base of the petiole leaf. That's really what puts it in the Polygonaceae, the knotweed family. It has these clusters of tiny white flowers late in the summer, and they eventually produce these tiny little seeds that are viable. But really, what really spreads the species is this photo that I actually collected just a few days ago of the rhizomes, the roots and rhizomes, where you can see the little buds on those rhizomes at the joints, where those during a flooding event will pick up and create new infestations. That's what's happened at in the Wilson Creek watershed. So looking at Wilson Creek watershed within that really dense infestation area where we started doing some more heavy control work, where we get acidic cove forest with dense rhododendron thickets, there's very poor invasion, which is good. But where you see in this red highlighted arrow, where rocky bars and shores and a little bit more open on the edge, that's where we get the invasion. And the steeper slopes above there with the acidic oak hickory forest and chestnut oak forest, no infestation. But along the broader, partially forested portion of the floodplain, we are getting infestations. And you can see here the Japanese knotweed occurring in islands as well as on the edge and scattered from either dense to scattered infestations. This is along a 2.6-mile stretch of the river or the creek on this portion of the U.S. Forest Service owned habitat area. So in addition to doing control work, we worked with Mountain True to develop a monitoring strategy where we installed plots through we did transects, 30-meter long transects. Within each transect, we selected 10 randomly selected 1 by 1 meter plots. And within each of those plots, we collected stem counts and percent cover by cover classes for each one of those, so we can detect what is going on. And in the what we started out with was we did foliar treatment following regrowth after first cutting with brush blades. We went and cut all the individual stems. Typically, many of the stems were 6 to 8 feet in height. We cut them, and then we applied about a month later, when the stems were about a foot in height, with the regrowth. We used a 3 to 4% solution of triclopyr 3A mixed in with Agridex as an adjuvant, and about 0.1% solution of Agridex. We used Agridex because it is less toxic to aquatic life. And also, let me say, to begin with, when we cut the stems with a brush blade, from the very beginning, we decided, well, we wanted to take all those stems and get them away from the river because we were concerned about those actually resprouting. So we took them as far away from the river as possible. That, of course, increased the cost of our timing of our actual control efforts. But we checked it after 3 times, and we really did not get that significant amount of regrowth, hardly any. So at this point in time, we just cut and let them go wherever they are. So the results after the first 4 years, and it took way too long, it showed a slow decline with a fairly minimal decrease in the stem count, and just a perceptible decrease in the percent cover. Although people would, who I know, friends of mine who went up there and fished this portion of the watershed, they did note that, hey, you guys are doing something in there. There's a lot less Japanese knotweed, but it really did not show up as significant in our plots. Part of and probably some of the reasons it took longer was we were not able to treat as frequently as we wanted to. It's because of the remote access. The trails from the road to the river, anywhere from zero point 0.8 to 1.5 miles, so it's more remote, and as well as the 2.6 mile stretch of the river. So we've paid as much as $55,000 annually just to treat that. And then we also had questions as to the control mix, the chemical mix, and the timing. Of course, we put that all into our strategy. We developed a very complex strategy. No, just kidding. We really did not do much. We actually got the group back together, and Mamie Colburn, who was working with TNC at the time, had researched some of the Japanese knotweed control methods across the country, and she had come across some Imazamox. So we decided to use some Imazamox, and we mixed Imazamox and glyphosate, 3% solution, with Agrodex again as an adjuvant. And within one treatment, we got a 51% reduction in the stem counts and 25% reduction actually in the plots, no Japanese knotweed. After 2 treatments, it was down to 80% reduction in stem counts. And again, half of the plots had no Japanese knotweed. So we are seeing control. And at this point in time, we think the best strategy is to, if you can, to treat multiple times annually. To begin with, cut with brush blades for the first. And then I would also wait till, often what happens with Japanese knotweed is you get a late frost in the springtime, and it hits the individual herb. It's very susceptible. So I would let it resprout and then cut it again, cut it after that. In other words, you're reducing the carbohydrate reserve in the root mass at that point, and then start your chemical treatment after the regrowth. If you can, treat twice. Generally, we started in mid-June or late June, and we're able to only once, because of timing, we have not been able to get 2 treatments. But I think if you could do 2 treatments in 1 year, you would have much better success. So with that, I would like to say that I really thank people from Mountain True, Lauren Recker, who did almost all the monitoring reports and actually was in the field, Bob Gale, who the ecologist there, then also TNC, Mamie Colburn, who works, who no longer works there, but was a temporary employee with them, as well as Megan Sutton, who is the mountain coordinator. I should just say Lauren now is actually working for the Forest Service in the GW. So there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Let's see.
Gary, thank you so much. That was informative. I think we talked about this before the break was still going on, but I hope this stimulated some ideas in people. And I do see I had a question myself, but I'll go ahead and there's another question in the chat from John Odell. Hey, John, another good friend of ours from Sackwamp days. John was asking, was that 50% mix of Imazamox and glyphosate 3% Imazamox plus 3% glyphosate?
Altogether, it would be a 3% solution, but half and half. You don't want to get altogether, it would be 3% of each, and it would still create a 3% solution. Your final concentration is 3%.
Awesome. Gary, I had a question. Well, 2, I guess. First was more directly related to your findings. So, you had said y'all had spent like $55,000 annually to treat a stretch of river. How did that cost change when you moved to Imazamox? Or have you been able to collect enough information to determine that yet?
It's different now because we have The highest cost was also when we required, um, we actually put in, we would treat, because we had some concerns from um, people putting lawsuits for the Forest Service with the mixes of chemicals. We mixed all our own chemicals and took the chemical mix on the field. So that increased the cost. And I know John has worked with me with that. But now what we're doing is we're actually allowing the individual participants to mix in the field as long as they're 100 feet from water. And so the cost has gone down in that regard. But it's an excellent question. Clearcast, which is a Imazamox, is about 3 times as expensive as triclopyr 3A or glyphosate. So because we've had to treat the cost has gone down also because we're now working with American Conservation Experience. So their costs are lower and the contracts. So it's hard to estimate, and generally we are seeing over time they have to spend less time. So the costs are going down, but I can't absolutely answer that question. It's kind of apples to oranges.
Okay. We've got a couple other questions. So I've got one from Sean Moore. Hey, Sean. This is for Gary. Some other studies have shown a significantly reduced effectiveness when blending glyphosate and Imazamox as compared to Imazamox alone. The hypothesis being the difference in kill rates. Do you have any thoughts or experience with that? And by kill rates, he is clarifying. He says he means the time that it takes to kill the foliage.
The timing, you mean just in that year, or the number of applications that you have to do?
I think what he's saying is that compared to using a Imazamox alone, it looks like there's some studies that show that when you blend it with glyphosate, the foliage kill rate elongates, and so it takes longer to kill the foliage than it does with just Imazamox alone. And I hope I'm restating that question.
Right. I suspect that's probably true. And even if it takes a little bit longer, as long as it kills the individual stems, I'm fine with that. We did a little bit of testing with just Imazamox, but we have not done a lot of just solo Imazamox, primarily because of the cost.
Gotcha. Related to that, Sharon from State Parks has a question. What brand of Imazamox did you use? Did you go generic or did you use Clearcast?
We use Clearcast. That's what we could get. If you have a generic brand, I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, you can order it from Alligare. They have a Alligare. They have.
We have used the Alligar. Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Yeah. The cost wise was no difference to what I could see, but maybe someone else has seen a different cost.
I have not seen a different cost, but I do know that generally comparison 1-to-1, Alligar is much cheaper. But it could be that chemical is just expensive to produce regardless. So another question here from Peach Hubert. Should we wait until the knotweed is full height before the first cutting in order to more fully exhaust root store, or cut it at a shorter height?
That's a good question. I would probably wait for it to go to full height, and it should get to full height within mid to late May, and then just cut it, and you will have a better impact on its carbohydrate reserve, because it put all that storage into the leaves from the roots.
Gotcha. Leslie Stark from Plant Conservation had an answer that there is another generic formulation, much cheaper. Leslie, maybe shoot us an email with
Thanks,
that.
Leslie. I knew everybody.
Sorry, I can't seem to get it my next chat to go through. It's called Castaway, and Helena charges $2.15 a gallon, at least on state contract.
Wow,
Huh. I
that's
get
pretty.
it for like $300 a gallon. So, good. Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah.
I knew someone would have a better answer than me.
Hmm. And hey, Gary, I had kind of a pie in the sky type question. Understanding the mode of propagation and how flooding benefits this species by sending propagules downstream. Has there been any sort of consideration on trying to reduce new downstream populations by maybe trying to capture or trap some of these propagules? I don't know what that would look like, but I was wondering if anyone had been thinking about that.
I don't know how easily it would be to do that. Particularly, I guess it would be easier in a smaller watershed or smaller stream.
Sure.
It would be something interesting to. Would have to almost create weirs.
Yeah, like a trash trout. You know
Kind
how
of
there's
like
those
I
devices that take.
know Coweta experimental station on the U.S. Forest Service has weirs where they actually collect a lot of data. That might be something. I don't know how good that would be for fish populations and things like
Sure.
that.
Well, I was thinking something like a trash trout, that collects floating trash off the surface, and allows fish to pass under. But then that would necessitate understanding whether or not the propagules float or sink. So, there's more to be considered there. But I just thought I'd share that
Yeah,
question.
I mean, it's interesting. We were talking before the break about there's a really rare other shrub in North Carolina, Virginia spirea, which has the same mode of propagation and expansion uh, with flooding events, but it isn't quite as effective. Why isn't it quite as effective? I don't know. It might be part of the some of the reasons. I work on the Chio River, and the Chio River was actually deflooded uh, more or less because of creating a reservoir, Santilla Creek Reservoir, or I should say dewatered. And the once there was more FERC relicensing and they started creating more flooding events, they've actually seen more spread of Virginia spirea. In fact, we did a survey this past year and found 15 more sites. So if I don't know how to catch them.
Sure.
I mean, I do think one thing that should be said, and I should have said it during the presentation, there was a severe flood event in 2019 in Wilson Creek. That may have had some effect on moving some of the rhizomes, and maybe it actually reduced some of it.
Sure.
We have
That's good to
another.
know.
We have another location of Japanese knotweed over in White Oak Creek, a small location over in West North Carolina, Macon County, where it had both a flooding event plus also it was impacting Virginia spirea, where the flooding event impacted the Virginia spirea as well as impacted the Japanese knotweed. And I think one thing to also to think about with control of Japanese knotweed, we have seen some cross contamination with, and it might be through root movement, where we actually did some cut stem treatment of Japanese knotweed with triclopyr, and it affected Virginia spirea.
Hmm.
I don't know if
Interesting.
anybody else has had that same.
So like root exudation of the chemical,
Right.
perhaps. Okay.
I don't know if that's what it was, but it happened
Sure.
at two different sites. One was with the state, and one was with us on the U.S. Forest Service property.
Interesting. Well, we could talk about knotweed all day. And Gary, I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Sure.
Very